Jerusalem was restless. The city pulsed with the breath of 1,000 stories. Yet on this night there was one thread in the tapestry that held more weight than any other. The narrow alleys were thick with travelers, their voices mingling with the bleating of sacrificial lambs, the shuffle of sandals on stone, the aroma of roasted meat drifting through the dry air. Passover was near, and with it, a tension so sharp it could slice the air like a blade. But beyond the clamor, hidden in the dusk's gentle descent, there was a figure walking with quiet certainty. He moved through the streets, not with the aimlessness of a wanderer, but with the gravity of a man fulfilling prophecy. His eyes carried the weight of the ages, as if he had seen the beginning and knew how the end would unfold. His name was Jesus. To some, he was a prophet. To others, a threat. To the empire, a problem. And to the 12 men who followed him, he was teacher, guide, and something more, something unspoken. On this night, he called them to dine together one final time. The room had already been prepared, an upper chamber in a borrowed house, its walls heavy with silence, its wooden beams darkened by time. The oil lamps flickered as if aware of what was to come, casting long shadows against the stone. The table was laid not just with food, bread, herbs, wine, but with fate itself. No one spoke of it aloud, but each man who climbed those stairs that night carried the same question behind his eyes. Why does it feel like the end? Jesus sat among them like a man seated at his own funeral, but his face, though solemn, bore no fear. There was peace in his silence, a strange serenity. In his movements, he took the bread, held it up as if presenting it to the heavens, and tore it. "This," he said, "is my body, broken for you." The words dropped like stones into the stillness. The disciples stared. They had heard him speak in parables, in riddles, in revelations. But this was too real. He was not speaking in metaphor. There was something final in the tone of his voice, something irreversible. Then came the wine. He poured it into a cup, deep red, swirling with meaning. "This is my blood, the blood of the covenant, poured out for many," and there it was, the turning point, the moment history would remember as the start of the final chapter, the Last Supper. But it was more than a meal. It was a declaration, a surrender, a revelation of betrayal. Because then, without raising his voice, Jesus looked around the table and spoke words that froze every soul in place. "Truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me." A gasp broke the silence. Faces turned in disbelief. Hands twitched nervously. Hearts raced. "Is it I, Lord?" they asked one by one, their voices cracking under the weight of dread. He didn't answer directly. He didn't need to. His eyes did the speaking, and then he turned to Judas. "What you are about to do, do it quickly." The room held its breath. Judas froze, his fingers tightening around the purse beneath his cloak. Then he stood, slowly, methodically, and exited into the night. The door shut behind him with a sound that echoed far louder than it should have, like the sealing of a tomb, and the meal continued. But not as before. The shadows had thickened. Time had accelerated. The end was coming, and everyone in that room knew it, even if they couldn't yet see what form it would take. They sang a hymn together, a final song, voices trembling but united. It was a tradition, yes, but also a goodbye, and after the final note faded into the rafters, Jesus stood. He looked at them all. Peter, who would soon deny him. Thomas, who would later doubt. John, who would stay. And the others who would scatter like leaves in the wind. Then he said simply, "Let us go." And so they did. Out into the darkness, toward the garden, toward the betrayal, toward the cross, and the world, though unaware, tilted on its axis. Night had fallen over Jerusalem. Like a shroud, the stars above shone cold and distant, as if watching silently, unmoved by the drama unfolding below. The streets had quieted, save for the occasional murmur of Roman patrols and the muffled footsteps of men with purpose in their hearts and silver in their hands. But outside the city walls, in a grove known as Gethsemane, 12 men moved among the twisted olive trees, led by one who carried the burden of all humanity on his shoulders. Jesus had led them there not for safety, but for surrender, and the garden, once a place of refuge, of prayer, of calm, would become the stage for the breaking of the world. As they arrived, Jesus paused. His face, already marked by sorrow, had deepened into something beyond grief, something ancient and inevitable. He turned to his disciples, and in a voice barely above a whisper said, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." But 3 of them, Peter, James, and John, he took further into the heart of the garden. The same 3 who had seen his glory on the mountaintop were now to witness his agony. The contrast could not have been more jarring. His voice cracked. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow, to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." And then he walked alone. Each step deeper into the garden was a descent into the abyss. The olive branches clawed at him like shadows come alive, and the silence of the night seemed to press down with a suffocating weight. He fell to the ground, not knelt, not bowed, but collapsed, as though crushed by the unbearable pressure of what was to come, and he prayed, not the gentle prayers of peace and gratitude, but a raw, trembling cry from the deepest chamber of the soul, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." There was a pause, a silence so total that even the earth seemed to wait. "Yet not as I will, but as you will." And with that sentence, heaven and earth tilted. That was the moment, not the nails, not the cross, when the sacrifice was truly made. In that lonely garden, under the indifferent stars, the Son bowed to the will of the Father, and the fate of mankind was sealed. He returned to his disciples and found them asleep. Even in his most desperate hour, they had failed to keep watch. "Could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter, sorrow in his tone, not anger. "Watch and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." And he went back, alone again. A second time he fell to his knees and prayed, "My Father, if it cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." His sweat had become like drops of blood, a mystery to medicine but understood by those who know true anguish. Hematidrosis, the body pushed to the edge of its limits. It was not fear of death that gripped him, but the weight of sin, the full fury of judgment about to be poured on him. Innocence preparing to carry guilt. He returned again, and again, asleep. The very men who swore loyalty to the end could not stay conscious in his agony, and yet he loved them still. A third time he prayed, a third time he returned, and this time he did not wake them. He simply said, "Sleep on now and take your rest." But even that moment of peace was short-lived. In the distance, torches flickered, voices approached. The hour had come. Jesus straightened. The weariness in his body did not match the fire in his eyes. There was no fear, only resolve. The lamb, prepared for slaughter, walked forward to meet his fate, and from the shadows emerged Judas, a friend, a betrayer. He stepped forward and kissed Jesus on the cheek, a gesture of affection twisted into the symbol of betrayal. "Rabbi," he said. Jesus looked him in the eyes, and with sorrow deeper than words could hold, asked, "Judas, do you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" The soldiers moved in. Swords clanged. Torches illuminated terrified faces. Peter, in a flash of misguided loyalty, drew his blade and slashed, severing the ear of a servant named Malchus. But Jesus intervened. "Put your sword back in its place," he commanded. "Do you think I cannot call on my Father? And he will at once send more than 12 legions of angels. But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled? And in one of the most startling moments of mercy the world had ever seen, he touched the servant's ear and healed him. Even now, especially now, he loved. He turned back to the crowd, a sea of temple guards, Pharisees, and Roman authority. "Am I leading a rebellion," he asked, "that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this is your hour, when darkness reigns." They bound him. The hands that healed the sick, lifted the dead, fed the multitudes, now tied with coarse rope. And as they led him away, his disciples, those who promised never to leave, fled into the darkness, scattered by fear, all except Peter, who followed from a distance, and John, who watched in silence. The garden was still again. The olive trees returned to their quiet vigil. The stars, untouched, continued their cold watch. But the world was different now. In the space of a few hours, betrayal had blossomed, innocence had been bound, and prophecy had moved one breath closer to fulfillment. The gears of history turned. The lion had become the lamb, and the trial of the ages was about to begin. Jerusalem awoke under a sky heavy with silence. The wind held its breath. The birds sang low and slow. Even the sun, as it rose over the city's sandstone walls, seemed reluctant to shine. It was not a normal morning. Something ancient stirred. Beneath the surface, something divine and dreadful. At the Roman fortress of Antonia, cold steel clanged against stone. Soldiers moved with routine efficiency, armored shadows marching through corridors etched with centuries of conquest. But today, they escorted not a rebel or a thief, but a man whose presence was unlike any they'd known. Jesus of Nazareth. Bound, bruised, but upright, he walked with the calm of someone who had already accepted what others could not begin to fathom. The chains around his wrists did not define him. The jeers of the guards did not move him. He walked not like a prisoner, but like a king headed for his coronation. He had been dragged through the night, first to the religious leaders, then to the Roman authorities. His silence had infuriated them. His truth had terrified them. And now he stood before Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea, the hand of Caesar in this volatile province. Pilate was not a man easily shaken. He'd seen revolts, executions, plots, and power struggles. But this man unnerved him. He sat in his stone seat, staring down at Jesus. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked, trying to sound in control. Jesus looked at him, eyes steady. "Is that your own idea?" he asked, "or did others tell you about me?" Pilate frowned. That wasn't how these trials went. The accused begged, they lied, they pleaded. But Jesus, he questioned the judge. The crowd outside roared louder. The chief priests spat accusations with fury. Pilate turned again. "Don't you hear the charges they are bringing against you?" Still, Jesus said nothing. Pilate knew something was wrong. This man was no insurrectionist. No mad prophet, no criminal. He wasn't dangerous, not in the way Rome feared, and yet the crowd wanted blood. So Pilate had an idea. There was a Passover custom to release a prisoner chosen by the people. He brought out two men, one Jesus, the other Barabbas, a murderer, a revolutionary, a man whose hands were stained with innocent blood. Surely they would choose the innocent man, but the chief priests had already turned the tide. "Give us Barabbas," they shouted. Pilate was stunned. Then what should I do with Jesus, the one called the Messiah? The answer hit like thunder. "Crucify him!" He stepped back. This was madness. Why? What crime has he committed? But logic was gone. Truth had drowned in fury. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate turned to a bowl of water. He washed his hands before them all. "I'm innocent of this man's blood," he said, "but no one is ever innocent when injustice is allowed to reign." He handed Jesus over to be flogged, and the brutal dance began. The Roman soldiers, masters of cruelty, tore off his robes and tied him to a post. The scourge, a whip with metal and bone woven into leather, struck his back. Once, twice, again. The flesh tore, blood splattered. They mocked him, they wrapped him in a scarlet robe, pressed a crown of thorns onto his skull. Blood ran into his eyes. They placed a reed in his hand like a scepter. Then one by one they knelt before him in mock worship. "Hail, King of the Jews!" And then they struck him again and again. When they were finished with their twisted game, they led him outside. Sitafuri ban tatasaw. Sentence was official: crucifixion. He was forced to carry his own cross, a massive beam of rough wood, through the city streets. The path would become known as the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering. The people watched. Some mocked, some wept, some turned away, unable to face what they had done. Jesus stumbled beneath the weight. Blood dripped from his back, his head, his knees. A Roman pulled a man from the crowd, Simon of Cyrene, and forced him to help carry the cross. Outside the city gates, on a hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull, the soldiers prepared the execution. They laid him on the beam, held out his hands. Iron spikes were driven through flesh and bone into the wood, then his feet. Then they raised the cross. Pain became the air he breathed. They stripped him of his clothes and cast lots for them, fulfilling prophecy without even knowing it. Above his head, a sign read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews," written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek, so that all the world could read the truth. At his side, 2 criminals hung. One cursed him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other whispered something different. "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus turned to him even through the pain. "Today you will be with me in paradise." Below him, Mary, his mother, stood weeping. John, the beloved disciple, stood beside her. Even in agony, Jesus saw them. "Woman, behold your son," he said, and to John, "Behold your mother." At noon, darkness covered the land. For 3 hours, the sun itself refused to shine. It was as if creation mourned, as if the heavens themselves turned their face away. Then, at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani?" My God, why have you forsaken me?" It was not a cry of doubt. It was the beginning of Psalm 22, a prophecy written centuries before, describing this very moment. The soldiers thought he was calling for Elijah. They offered him sour wine on a sponge, and then he whispered, "It is finished." With one final breath, he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And he died. The earth shook, rocks split, graves opened, and in the temple, the veil, that massive curtain separating man from God, was torn in two, from top to bottom. The centurion who stood at the foot of the cross stared up in awe and fear. "Surely this man was the Son of God," he whispered. The sun returned, but the world was not the same. That night they took his body down. A wealthy man named Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for permission to bury him. He wrapped Jesus' body in fine linen, placed it in a tomb carved from rock, and sealed it with a massive stone. The Sabbath was near. The city grew quiet, and in the silence of that grave something stirred. The promise, the Last Supper, had not been a farewell. It had been a beginning. The bread broken, his body given willingly, the wine poured, his blood sealing a new covenant. The betrayal, the arrest, the trial, the cross, none of it had been a mistake. It had been destiny. Love had driven him to the garden. Justice had lifted him to the cross. Mercy had buried him in the tomb. But grace would not leave him there, because on the third day death would lose its sting, the grave would surrender its captive, and the world would never be the same.